Our reading is 1 Samuel 17, 1 Samuel chapter 17. We'll read the entire chapter together. Hear the word of the Lord. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah. And they camped between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. He also had bronze greaves on his legs, and a bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." Again the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons. And Jesse was old in the days of Saul, advanced in years among men. The 3 older sons of Jesse had gone after Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and the second to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. Now the 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. The Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand. Then Jesse said to David his son, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brothers. Bring also these 10 cuts of cheese to the commander of their 1,000, and look into the welfare of your brothers, and bring back news of them. For Saul and they and all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines." So David arose early in the morning, and left the flock with a keeper, and took the supplies, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper, and ran to the battle line, and entered in order to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard them. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel." Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" The people answered him in accord with this word, saying, "Thus it will be done for the man who kills him." Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David. And he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle." But David said, "What have I done now? Was it not just a question?" Then he turned away from him to another and said the same thing. And the people answered the same thing as before. When the words which David spoke were heard, they were told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Then Saul said to David, "You were not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul clothed David with his garments and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. David girded his sword over his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. So David said to Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them." And David took them off. He took a stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand. And he approached the Philistine. Then the Philistine came on and approached David with a shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy, with a handsome appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine also said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Then it happened, when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the slain Philistines lay along the way to Sharaim, even to Gath and Ekron. The sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camps. Then David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Now when Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" And Abner said, "By your life, O king, I do not know." The king said, "You inquire whose son the youth is." So when David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the Philistine's head in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." We've read it, start to finish. And there's a sense in which I could almost have foregone reading it this morning. Not really, it is the inspired word of the Lord. But I doubt there is a man, a woman, or even a child among us who could not tell you this story front to back. It's David and Goliath. Although, interestingly, you'll notice the text calls him the Philistine, not Goliath most of the time, or the uncircumcised Philistine. This is one of the most familiar stories in the Bible. Everybody knows it. And yet, I'm sorry to say, it is also one of the most misused stories in the Bible. Very often people come to this and they walk away with a very simple message. Believe in God and you can do anything. There was even a movie made, if you remember it, Facing the Giants, and nobody get mad. I did enjoy that movie. It was a good movie. A little melodramatic, but what movie isn't at some points? I liked it. But it made the point. If you believe, you can do anything. Here's the problem with that. You and your life are not the point of this story. You and your challenges are not the point of this story. In fact, if I may go farther, you and your faith are not even the point of this story. The object of your faith is the point of this story. This story is about God's King. It's about God's King. What this story is telling us is that God has raised up his king who confidently glorifies him in the deliverance of his people. God has raised up his king who confidently glorifies him in the deliverance of his people. First, we see that God has raised up his king. I don't know if you've noticed, but as we've gone through 1 Samuel, Saul has started to go down and David has started to come up. There's a reversal of situations happening here. They've drawn up in battle array, the armies of Israel. And here is Saul, a man who had been used by the Lord to give them victory over Philistines before. But this is not an ordinary battle. They are not going to charge the Philistines because in the ancient world they would have this thing where sometimes instead of having a full battle they would choose a champion. And they'd say, go out and fight each other and whoever wins, that'll decide the fight. And wouldn't you know it, the Philistines had a ringer. Goliath, 9 feet 9 inches tall. His suit of mail, just the bronze coat of mail, about 150 pounds. Now, if that sounds extraordinary, I did call my dad and went, hey, Dad, because he was in the Army, what's the heaviest pack you ever had to carry? He went, 70 pounds is about normal. I was like, all right, so a 9 foot 9 inch tall guy, 150 pounds is reasonable. That makes sense. This is a big guy with a big coat of mail, a big sword, a big spear. He's got another guy to carry his shield, which is very common. The fighter would fight, and the shield carrier is just there to keep him from getting hit. This man is a walking tank. Whose job is it to fight the walking tank? Why did they ask for a king to go fight our battles for us? This is Saul's job, and he's scared. He hides, along with the rest of the people. David, he does not hide. He goes out and fights. And not only that, notice what one of the promises is here. He's already been brought into the king's court. He is now about to be permanently attached to the king's court. He had gone back and forth when his older brothers had to go to war. Dad called him back home. But Saul starts asking, whose son is he? Whose son is he? Because he made a promise. Whoever kills the Philistine, I'll enrich him, I'll free him from public service and taxes, him and his whole father's household, and I will give him my daughter. I'll make him part of the royal family. Not only is this guy going to be a head honcho in the army, not only is he going to have standing in the court, he is actually going to join the royal household. The inner circle of the inner circle. David is moving up, 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 and Saul is moving down, down, down. We see that kind of reversal in the New Testament. When we come to the New Testament, there is no king in Israel. They're ruled by the Sanhedrin, by the political leaders who ruled the temple. They were not of the right lineage to be priests, but they had become priests. That's a long story. Go read 1 Maccabees. I know it's not in the Bible, but it's fairly accurate. It'll give you the background. And then comes Jesus, the king. And the leaders of Israel, who are supposed to be wise as they oppose Jesus, they become more and more foolish. Their sins, their selfishness keep being brought to the center. And the Roman Empire begins crushing them lower and lower until in AD 70 the temple is destroyed and their political standing is lost. And Jesus, as he counters them, rises higher and higher and higher in the people's estimation. And his word begins to spread throughout the empire until someday the pagan Roman Empire will be forced to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, even over Caesar. God has made it abundantly clear who his king is. And that's important because our fate rests in the hands of the king. We are not the captains of our fate. We are not the masters of our souls. Who we are and what will become of us is determined by the work of the king. Fortunately, as we also see in this passage, the king goes to his work with confidence. God's king is confident. Look at David. He shows up, here's the Philistine, and then he hears the people talking, oh, anyone who kills this Philistine, he'll be enriched, made free, he'll marry the king's daughter. David's like, cool. He's sort of looking around like, why hadn't anybody else taken up this offer? That'd be like finding $1 million on the ground. All you have to do is pick it up, and nobody's picking it up. David's like, what's wrong with you people? He's defying God. He's going to die. Anybody could fight this guy and he'd keel over. He can't win because he's defied the living God. We've got Yahweh on our side. Somebody go fight him. Nobody's fighting, so he starts asking around, hey, what do you get if you kill this guy? This deal's starting to look really, really good from my standing. He goes before Saul. Remember, Saul knows him. He's played music for him. He's been used to drive the evil spirit away. He's been Saul's armor bearer. And he says, let no man's heart fall. I'll kill him. He's confident because he knows God's promises that anyone who defies God, anyone who defies Israel, must fall. And he's confident because he's experienced God's work. He says, oh, king, yeah, he's a 9-foot, 9-inch tall guy with a bunch of armor and weapons. That's no scarier than a lion, right? I've killed one of those. Killed a bunch of those. That's not scarier than a bear. I've killed a bunch of those. In fact, if I remember right, grizzlies can be 9 feet tall. He's like, what do I care? God saved me from that. He'll save me from this. He's an uncircumcised Philistine who's defied God. He tries on the king's armor. Nothing wrong with armor. David would wear armor later. But he says, this armor, I haven't tested it. I don't know how to move. You know, you've got to know your armor. He says, I'll just go at him in my shepherd's clothes. I've got a staff. I got a sling. I'll get some rocks. We're going to be all right. And he goes out. And do you notice what he tells Goliath? I love this. He doesn't have a sword. And he tells Goliath, I'm going to kill you and I'm going to cut your head off. Did you notice he told him that? I'm going to kill you and I'm going to cut your head off. He doesn't have a blade. And what does he do? He kills him and he cuts his head off with his own sword. By the way, later in the book, David takes Goliath's sword again because he doesn't have a weapon. I just think that's cool. David's like, you know, he goes up to the tabernacle. Is there a sword here? We have Goliath's sword. Yeah, I'll take it. There's none like it. I don't think there would be one like it. The thing would be as big as David was. That's just awesome. Jesus was confident. He came to earth. He came to earth. No army. No golden throne. Some fishermen. A zealot. A tax collector who ought to have been killing each other, but by God's grace they didn't. A bunch of ragtag guys and a message. No home. Just preaching the truth. And he was so confident in God's will that he went all the way and he did the thing that should never have resulted in victory by any human standard. He died. He died. And then he came back to life. Jesus looked at the plan of the Father and said, yes, I will do that. I will do that. I eagerly accept this mission that I may carry out your will. The confidence of the King encourages us, because if there is anything you need, if there is anything that has to be done for you to be saved and you to be blessed, Jesus Christ has done it. He went to the cross for you. He lived on earth for you. Do you realize what a low thing that is? This is the God of the universe, and somebody had to change his diaper. This is the God of the universe, and soldiers spit on him. This is the King and God of Israel, Yahweh of hosts. And the high priest told him he ought to die. His high priest. He did that for you. And now we're told he lives at the right hand of the Father to make intercession for us. He's not done working. He prepares a place for you, and he will come back in the same body in which he was raised, in which he lived on this earth, to gather us to himself. There is nothing the King will not do for you. But it's not just about you. The King is working to glorify God. The King is working to glorify God. David, when he fights, he says openly to Goliath, I have two purposes in fighting this battle. He says, there are two things I need to do. One, I need to show all the earth there is a God in Israel. You come to me and curse you by your gods. Stones, rocks, carvings. You can almost imagine him if I assume he's familiar with the incident. Didn't you capture our ark once and put it in front of Dagon, and Dagon fell over twice? Don't you curse me by your rocks. We have the living God. We don't need an image of him. He is alive. And soon you'll know that, and everybody else. 2, this assembly, the Israelites, who are cowering in fear, they need to be reminded that swords don't win wars. Remember, they didn't have them. The only 2 people in the army who had a sword or a spear were Saul and Jonathan. Everyone else had pointy sticks. And David says that doesn't matter, because the battle belongs to the Lord. He determines the outcome. He is the one who will fight. And today, not only am I going to kill you, but I'm going to kill your armies with you. How dare you defy God? When the battle was over, it wasn't just David whose name the people remembered. They knew there is a God in Israel, and he fights for his people. When Jesus came to earth, I know the popular song says he thought of us above all, but it's not what he said. What did he say? John chapter 4, his followers come back to him. They try to give him food and water. He says, I don't need that. I have food to eat you know not of. They said, who brought him food? And he says, no, guys, my food is to do my Father's will. He openly spoke of God as his Father. Not in the same sense that he's our Father, for Jesus is the only begotten Son, the eternal Son of God. Co-existent with the Father, God of God, light of light, very God of very God. I love the Nicene Creed just for those words. A bunch of other words too, but those especially. It's beautiful. And he glorified the Father. He said, everything I have said, those words are from the Father. and he did the Father's will. He glorified him. God's glory is our greatest sense of peace and comfort. Have you ever noticed when you come to church and we sing the praises of God, it feels like home? Singing that hymn this morning, "The Church is One Foundation," you could put me in Antarctica, get a group of Christians together, and let us sing "The Church is One Foundation." I'm home. I'm great. I'm fine. Of course, I'd probably like Antarctica because I'm an introvert, and it doesn't get any more alone time than a place with no permanent residence. But anyhow, when we worship God, we are at home. I've been to worship services in Mexico where I couldn't understand a word they were saying, and I still felt at home. Because I may not understand exactly what they're saying, but I get the point. I'm hearing Jesus and Dios a lot. And I know what that means. And I know who they're praising. The reason you feel such peace when God is glorified, one, you were created to glorify him, and two, is what it is God does to bring glory to himself. You see, God's King glorifies God in the deliverance of his people. God's King glorifies God in the deliverance of his people. David is not there to kill Goliath just because there's a big Philistine, and look at this, I killed him. The Philistines have taken part of the land that God promised to his people. The Philistines are gathered up in battle array to make the Israelites their servants again, as they had been. Why do you think they didn't have swords and spears? Because the Philistines said they couldn't. They were the ones who understood iron. They were the ones who had the science of it. They had taken it away from the Israelites, forbidden them to be blacksmiths and bronzesmiths. They were their masters. And a young shepherd boy walks out and says, "This is not the will of God, that we should serve you. It is not the will of God that you should rule the land God has given us. It is not the will of God for you to oppress us. We are sending you out." And he slings his rock, and he draws his opponent's sword and cuts off his head. And by the way, don't miss this, because again, nothing to do with my main point, but it's just so cool I can't help but mention it. God does cool stuff. Did you notice when he gets back to Saul, he's still got Goliath's head in his hand? He's still got it. And he takes it to Jerusalem. Bethlehem is right outside Jerusalem. Jerusalem was still ruled by the Jebusites, Canaanites. And he puts the head up, sort of like, "Hey guys, you're next." Little warning. But he runs forward, and the army of Israel runs behind him because he's already won the battle. They're not there to fight a battle anymore. That's happened. The Philistines have screamed and run away. They are there to follow him in the victory. And they conquer the Philistines. They have victory that day. They kill their enemies, and then they come back because the Philistines left all their stuff. And they spoil the camp. They take its riches. Well, we've got bigger enemies than Philistines. Our enemies are sin, death, the curse. They are the same enemies that keep the whole world under. And Jesus Christ came, and he conquered our sin. And he took away the curse of God. And by faith in him, we are freed from God's curse and death. And we rise up not to win the victory. We rise up to share in the victory he has already won for us. We follow him. It's time we started living our part in the story. It's time we recognize what our role really is. And it's good news. The good news is, look, as bad as things have gotten in the world, and they've gotten pretty bad, as big of a mess as we find ourselves in, and it's a big mess, it's not your mess to clean up. It's not your enemy to defeat. The King is at work. He has already won the day. You are simply the Israelites running after him, sharing his victory and sharing the spoils. When you go out, you are not David facing Goliath. You are a soldier stepping over Goliath's body. And your king is running in front of you. And we can give the world the good news that the King has set us free, and that we don't have to be enslaved to our sin, our death, our curse. Deliverance is for anyone who believes in Jesus Christ. Let us worship the King, all glorious above. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.